Okay, imagine this for a second. A really dramatic contrast. You're a single mother, you're broke, actually relying on welfare just to, survive. You're clinically depressed, maybe not even sure you can pay the heating bill. This is modern Britain. And you've got this manuscript, right? But 12 publishers, 12, have already said no. That's the starting line. That was J.K. Rowling. Now, fast forward. That same woman builds this empire, literary, media, everything valued today at something like $25 billion. And her personal net worth, Forbes pegged it in June 2025 at $1.2 billion. So this isn't just a story about writing a successful book. It's one of the most incredible financial turnarounds, really, strategic masterclass we've seen.
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today. We're trying to peel back the magic, if you like, to see the actual blueprint underneath. This wasn't just luck, it was about leverage. We've looked closely at her path and identified basically 6 core long-term strategies. These principles, these sort of invisible habits, they systematically took her from that rock-bottom place to becoming this media mogul.
Right. And we really want to focus on the decisions she made along the way. We're looking at money here not as some kind of happy accident of fame, but as a tool. A deliberate tool for leverage, for control, which, let's be honest, is the goal for so many creatives, so many entrepreneurs listening right now, controlling your own narrative. Okay, let's get into it. Strategy 1, financial mindset, seeing money as leverage. And you really can't appreciate the strategy without remembering just how low that starting point was. She talked about it in her Harvard speech back in 2008. She said, quite starkly, "I was as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless." Just brutal honesty there.
Yeah, and that kind of extreme scarcity, it can either break you or it forces a kind of strategic clarity. It really focuses the mind. So when Bloomsbury finally said yes to Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in '96, the advance was, pretty modest, about 2,500 pounds. Now, for someone in her situation, the temptation must have been huge to just grab the cash, sign whatever standard contract was put in front of her.
Right, take the quick win.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting. This is the critical move. She made a deliberate strategic choice. She fought to retain creative control, yes, but crucially, the intellectual property rights, the IP. Now, for a first-time author, that's really unusual. Standard contracts back then, even now sometimes, they often strip away so many of those subsidiary rights. Film, merchandise, foreign rights. The publisher often wants a big slice. But she, or maybe her agent, pushed back hard.
So was that foresight? Did she somehow know this was going to be massive, or was it just a principle about owning her creation?
I think it points to incredible foresight, whether conscious or instinctive. By holding on to those rights, she set herself up for the long run. She was positioned to get ongoing royalties from everything that followed. We're talking 600 million books sold, yes, but also the films, the merchandise, the theme parks, video games, all those multiple streams of essentially passive income. Because the core story, the engine, always remain under her financial control.
And she herself defined money in a way that fits this perfectly. Not about luxury, but freedom. There's that famous quote, "I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better for freedom, not for happiness." That distinction is key, isn't it? Money is a tool for control. Control over your time, your narrative, that's the bedrock. So the big takeaway from strategy 1, protect your rights. That decision made the difference between a one-off payment and, $1.2 billion.
It absolutely did. And that flows directly into the second strategy, asset building through storytelling. We call it the narrative asset flywheel. See, she wasn't just writing books. She was building an entire ecosystem from day one, really, because she understood that long-term value comes from building assets, and that requires keeping strategic control over that core IP.
And the scale of that ecosystem.
Yeah.
The numbers are just staggering when you look at them. It's not small change. Over $7.7 billion at the global box office. That's just the original 8 Harry Potter films. And then look at how strong the brand still is. That Hogwarts Legacy video game. $1.2 billion in revenue in its first year. That was 2023, decades later.
Exactly. That gap, first book in the mid-90s, massive game revenue in 2023, that perfectly shows the flywheel effect. The core IP, the story, it's the engine. It spins off films. The films create demand for merchandise. The merch and films build the appetite for theme parks, Florida, Japan, Hollywood. And those parks, they keep driving people back to the books, back to the films. And crucially, those rights she kept back in '96 were broad enough. They covered things like video games, digital stuff, things that maybe weren't even fully imagined back then.
Wait, okay, but how specific could that original contract have been? Did it actually list, future console game percentages? That seems unlikely.
Probably not that specific, no. But the strength is in establishing broad ownership of the IP from the start. She didn't sell the rights outright, she licensed them. That meant retaining creative input and, crucially, financial participation in perpetuity for derivative works. The legal language would define derivative works really broadly, any media based on her characters, her world. So Hogwarts Legacy isn't just a separate paycheck. It actually refuels the entire franchise. It drives park attendance, book sales, merch sales. It increases the value of the very IP she still controls. It's a loop.
Ah, okay. So it's not just creating something popular, it's owning the ground it stands on. You structure it so every new thing, film, park, game, automatically makes the original asset more valuable.
Precisely. Own the platform, not just the performance. But, none of this happens. The ownership, the compounding without strategy 3, which is the discipline that made her dangerous. We call it discipline in the dark.
Yeah, everyone knows the image, right? The struggling writer scribbling in cafes like Nicholson's or the Elephant House while her baby daughter sleeps. It sounds quite romantic, but we need to look past the sort of picturesque setting and see the mechanism underneath. The reality was stark. Newly divorced, penniless, clinically depressed, raising an infant alone, and getting rejection letters, 12 of them. Yet she kept writing.
That's the absolute core of it. She didn't wait for inspiration or for conditions to be perfect. Success became almost inevitable because she built a routine, a non-negotiable routine. She succeeded despite her circumstances, not because of them. It wasn't about feeling creative. It was about solving a logistics problem, finding those pockets of time when her daughter slept and just putting the words down, regardless of the rejections piling up.
That level of resilience is kind of terrifying, isn't it? When everything external is telling you no, makes you wonder if the desperation was actually part of the fuel.
Maybe, but the key operational factor was consistency. She simply outlasted the failure. This is what we call the discipline gap. It's that invisible difference between people who wish for success and those who actually commit to the daily grind of building it, validation or no validation. She used her low point not for inspiration, maybe, but to forge a routine that prioritized the work. As she said herself, I had nothing to lose, and sometimes that makes you brave. And that bravery wasn't just emotional, it was channeled into consistent, measurable output.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Strategy 4. The values that kept her grounded, or what you called the silent billionaire code. And this is fascinating because it involves decisions that actively cost her huge sums of money, which seems totally counterintuitive for wealth building.
Exactly. That's why it's so revealing. After hitting massive global success, she made a decision that stunned many people. She refused to move her tax residence. Most people with that kind of wealth look for more favorable tax regimes abroad, standard practice, really. But she stayed in the UK.
And that wasn't a small gesture. It cost her, what, tens of millions, maybe hundreds over the years. Why do that?
Her reason was public, and it was rooted in gratitude. She said she believed in contributing back to the UK welfare state, the system that had supported her and her daughter when she had nothing. She felt she'd benefited, so she had a moral duty to pay back into it, even at the highest tax rates.
And her philanthropy ties into this too, doesn't it? Famously giving away so much money, over $160 million, that she actually fell off the Forbes billionaire list in 2012. PolitiFact confirmed that. I mean, that's an incredible statement. Prioritizing principle over the billion-dollar status. And founding Lumos, her charity working to get kids out of institutions globally.
Right. And if Strategy 4 is about the conviction behind her financial and charity decisions, Strategy 5, turning storytelling into global influence, is about the power and sometimes the cost of sticking to your convictions publicly.
That's a good link, because her influence is undeniable, but it's also become a source of intense debate. We have to remember the scale first. 600 million books, $7.7 billion from the films. She literally shaped a generation's imagination.
And the foundation of that influence, what we call the narrative power principle, comes back to that absolute control. Because she kept that non-negotiable ownership of the Potterverse IP, she maintains extraordinary creative and financial control over everything we discussed earlier, the films, parks, games.
She once said something like, I don't care about legacy, I care about what I do while I'm alive.
Yeah.
Which suggests she's very focused on the present impact, the immediate control.
And when you own the story, you control the stage. Which brings us to the controversies since around 2020. She's become a very prominent and very outspoken voice in the debates around gender identity and women's rights. And this has generated huge amounts of, social friction, backlash, division. Now, as analysts, we have to be impartial here. The point isn't whether you agree with her views or not. The point, strategically, is that her actions show she prioritizes her personal convictions over seeking public approval or maintaining uncomplicated popularity.
And sticking to those convictions clearly comes at a cost. But the underlying principle remains. Because she owns the core IP, even amid all this public division, the rules for the franchise, the future direction, the licensing, the creative calls, they still ultimately rest with her. So the takeaway from these two strategies maybe is that real power isn't just popularity. It's also about what you're willing to endure or even give up to stay true to yourself.
Well put. And that brings us neatly to the final piece, strategy 6. Playing the long game through crisis. We call it the quiet compounder strategy. Remember that crisis point we mentioned? 2012, donating herself off the Forbes list.
Yeah, you'd think that might trigger some panic, like a sudden scramble to launch something new, make back the money quickly.
But she did the opposite. She executed this very strategic, very long-term reset. The quiet compounder approach is about letting your existing assets grow steadily, reliably, almost passively, even while you might be dealing with other things, like public scrutiny. So no frantic new book series hoping lightning strikes twice. Instead, she doubled down on expanding the ecosystem she already owned and controlled.
Right, so what did that look like in practice? What were the big moves during that sort of reset period?
It was all about strategic expansion of the existing world, launching the Fantastic Beasts film series, for instance, signing off on those huge, complex licensing deals for the Wizard and World theme parks with Universal Studios, greenlighting major projects like the Hogwarts Legacy game, which, as we saw, paid off massively, but years later, in 2023. And now there's the HBO Max TV series reboot planned for 2026. These are long fuse projects.
That's really insightful. She was planting these huge financial seeds back in, say, 2012, 2015, knowing they wouldn't fully bear fruit for maybe a decade, all while weathering the public storms. She survived the noise by quietly, strategically, ensuring her core assets kept compounding value over time.
Exactly, and the proof is in the pudding, right? By June 2025, Forbes had her back in the billionaire club, $1.2 billion. It confirms the strategy. She played the long game, kept building strategically while everyone else was maybe distracted by the drama, build for the decade, not just for the day.
So let's zoom out. The invisible blueprint behind J.K. Rowling's journey from welfare to billionaire. It really wasn't fairy dust, was it? It was this blend of clear strategy, incredible resilience, and an almost obsessive focus on ownership. Built on seeing money primarily as freedom, practicing that intense discipline when nobody was watching, and fiercely protecting her creative rights to enable that future compounding.
And the real takeaway, a magic for you listening, is realizing she mastered the things that actually we can all potentially control. Our financial decisions, how we approach them, our creative discipline, that commitment to the work, and the narrative we choose to build, own, and defend. That's the blueprint. It applies whether you're writing the next global bestseller or building a small business or, developing software. So maybe the question to leave you with, the one that really defined her path, is this. Are you building anything right now that's truly worth compounding for the next 10 years? Even if absolutely no one is watching or cheering you on yet.
Because your story, whatever it is still being written. And that pen, whether it's, a magic wand or just a cheap arrow in a noisy cafe, that pen is always ultimately in your hands.